Hello everybody, welcome to today's live stream. I've had a few technical problems today, so I'm hoping the sound and everything else is okay. So if someone could just confirm through the chat that the sound's working okay. So just to explain how this works, during these live streams we spend most of the session on our trading platform, taking a look at markets, all of that sort of stuff. We'll have a look at some of the major events for next week. Then we'll jump in, have a look at the usual mix of markets that we look at, and that's it, isn't it? We've got a bit of an international crowd today. Nepal, Haiti, Lancashire, all three corners of the world. So let's just jump back onto here. So I'm just hoping the sound is all right. Excellent, thanks for that. At least that's working. So we're a bit of a PC disaster today. So weekly recap and market outlook for next week. Just do the risk warning first of all. This presentation is only for educational purposes. It does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones and Capital.com accept no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. Spread bets and CFDs are complex instruments and come with a high risk of losing money rapidly due to leverage. 76%, 0.25% of retail investor accounts lose money when spread betting and or trading CFDs with this provider. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets and CFDs work and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. There's someone on from Barbados. My God. Just a little bit jealous of that. Right, important events for next week. There's a lot of interest rate stuff next week. Tuesday, July the 20th, early hours in the morning, China rate decision. Wednesday, July the 21st, we've got the Bank of Japan minutes. There's a lot of focus on interest rates and inflation at the moment. And then EU rate decision on Thursday. So a whole week of central bank stuff. I think I've got, someone said, is it out of focus? I think I've got a weird camera. It's like a fisheye camera. So if I go back too far, I think I look a bit weird. So that's why it might appear out of focus. Hopefully the charts and everything else will be okay. Just a quick where to go for more info. Obviously, I do this with Capital.com. We do regular market updates on a whole host of markets throughout the week on our YouTube channel. If you're watching now on YouTube, if you can click subscribe. We look at gold, silver, oil, S&P, a whole load of stuff. To find out more about the trading platform, download the app, go to Capital.com. Find out more about me, trading updates throughout the week. David Jones, trading.com takes you to my Facebook page. I've launched this trading course in the last couple of months. You can find out more about that now on there. Any questions after this, please feel free to drop me an email. My email address is david.jones@capital.com. So any general questions about trading, I'm more than happy to try and answer them. At Jones the Markets on Twitter, and of course follow Capital.com on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. I'll mention again, we launched a stocks page, stocks channel, on YouTube. We're looking at US stocks. That is in the description, I think, for this session. So if you're watching this, the recorded version of this, or after you finish watching it, you can go and subscribe to our stocks channel, and we do 3 different stocks during the week. Right, let's get into it. I found it a bit of a tricky week this week, I must admit, for my own trading. I made a bit on the S&P, on the push out to all-time highs, and I've been chopped about a bit since then. So a bit of a tricky one for me this week after a good few weeks of trading. But we'll have a look at some of these different markets. As usual, I will look at some of the major stuff now: gold, silver, oil, couple of currency pairs, crypto, and stock market indices. Then if there's any stuff you want to look at, if you put it in the chat once I've been through all that stuff, we'll go and have a look at those. I thought we'd start off with gold. Gold hit a 1-month high yesterday, so you can see it here. That's the move yesterday, so trading up to its best levels since about the middle of June. And I'm bullish on gold. I think we put a video out yesterday, I think, and I do think, we always on the pre-recorded stuff, we always look at this long-term trend on gold going back to August 2018. So we're pretty much almost 3 years into that. and it's been, quite a disappointing performance since the all-time highs from last summer. Been correcting away, and I wondered if this break that we saw in May of this year was finally the correction was over. Got slammed in June, but it's held well above these old lows. And I think when we looked at it last week, I said I was expecting perhaps a bit of a bounce this week, and we've had it. It's perhaps looking a bit overcooked at the moment. If you look at an RSI, perhaps looking a little bit overheated. This is a 10-day RSI. I think I did put an order in to buy on yesterday's video. I don't know if that's been filled yet. We'll have a look in a second. Actually, let's have a look. Did that get filled? Show orders. Oh, not quite. I've got an order to buy at 18.10. But on gold, I still think we could see a bit more of a push next week. I mean, markets. I think the big concern for markets at the moment, although they're not really freaking out about it, is inflation. Concerns about inflation, and clearly, one of the things that people use for a hedge against inflation is gold, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen it had a lift. You can see we've got a good trend here. So for me, if I was a buyer of gold today, probably the closest I'd have my stop at the other side of 1800 looks like a good level. We've got big support on gold back here around about 1790. So I think even if it got put under some pressure early next week, I'd still probably be looking to be a buyer. So in the medium term, I'd be looking to see, can it run back up towards 1870, the highs from the middle of June. So I think it's an interesting market, to watch going into next week because of this trend that's been going on now since the end of June. So I think that's an interesting one to watch. Let's see what happens. And as we're on gold, let's do silver. See, is it still boring? I think yes is the quick answer there. So silver on the daily chart. Let's have a look at the daily charts. Look at that. Just still range bound silver. I mean, it's arguably a buying opportunity for a very short term point of view. Let's take a look at the short term in a minute. But look how tight that range has been since the 20th of June. So we're a month into that now, aren't we? And okay, I mean it swings around from $25.50 to $26.70. So there's a bit of volatility, but just no direction on silver. So I just find it just a really boring market at the moment. But arguably it's a buy. If I had to do a trade on silver now, I could be tempted to be a buyer. So I've just flipped things over to the hourly chart, looking like that. So for me, I think that could be interesting to watch going into next week. We've seen over the last week or so a lot of support from silver from 25.75 to 25.90. It'd be interesting to see if we see it hold pretty much where it is now. So I think even though medium term on the dailies is pretty boring, on the hourlies, on the shorter term stuff, perhaps we'll get something of a recovery next week. Let's see what happens. So we take a look at oil while we're looking at these things. Let's take a look at that. I think it's been an interesting week for oil. I would still be a buyer though, but I do have a trade on an oil at the moment that's losing money at the moment. But I do wonder, is it going to be an interesting week this week? There's been a lot. I mean, last week we had those talks between OPEC and OPEC Plus broke down. I must admit, I'm not really on top of the news for all the last couple of days. I don't know if they've agreed something. I did see something about OPEC and OPEC Plus, but looking at the price action. It's only, less than a couple of weeks ago, we saw oil at its best levels in more than 2.5 years. We've got to go way back to October 2018. But for me, the trend is still up. We've been following this oil trend. It feels like forever, but obviously it's only been, it accelerated since November last year. Trend is still up in oil. So for me, the weakness over the last couple of days looks like a really interesting buying opportunity. So for me, going into next week, perhaps wouldn't buy it today because it was still a little bit weak early on. But I think it's an interesting market going into next week. We have seen in oil sell-offs, and sell-offs only have served to bring in more buyers. So for me at the moment, I would take exactly the same approach. Just be looking to be a buyer. And for me, when it comes to stops, perhaps let's flip this over to an hourly chart. I do think it's an interesting one down here. we flip this over, it got slammed on the 14th of July, so a couple of days ago. I'll take this chart back out a bit. I think it's interesting to watch going into next week because, you know, we saw a lot of support for oil from $69.50 through to $70. You know, the market blipped briefly below 71. So I do wonder, are we going to see it make a base here? You know, so for me, only if it slipped below 69 does it look like that trend is changing. So I think it's an interesting one to watch going into next week. I think the price of oil. Let's see what happens. But for me, I'd be expecting 75, 76 again. What you always talk about price action, but what exactly is price action trading? Can you explain in simple terms? This is a fair point, actually. I think there is a video on our channel from a year ago, maybe even more, on price action, where I touched on price action. But for me, I think you can make the idea of price action trading as complicated or as simple as you want to. For me, you know, price action is, well, what is the price actually doing? And the price, the trend in oil is up. So it's a combination of trend and looking at things like support and resistance. You know, if you look at you know what the price of oil has done, what the price action in oil has been over the last month or so. I mean, for me, it's interesting that, you know, you see it. Look at it here in the 17th of June. It gets slammed down, but look how quickly it comes back. And I'd say again a similar sort of thing here. The 7th of July gets slammed down, but comes back fairly quickly. We haven't seen that yet, and I'm just wondering, are we going to see that next week? We've seen the price again slammed down from $75 on the 14th of July to $71 earlier today, this morning. So, you know, we just see an appetite for buyers. So for me, that's my approach to price action. Someone may have a different view. I don't care. But for me, it's about the trend and support and resistance when I'm looking at price action. So I think it is interesting down here because there's this whole zone, isn't there? 69 to 71-ish, where we don't see oil spend that much time down there. Let's see. I think it'll be an interesting week next week. Let's see what happens. Right, what are we doing? So we did oil, we did gold, silver. Should we let's take a look at some of the cryptos, and then we'll come to stock markets next. It's interesting. It's not interesting actually, but I think it's Bitcoin is just doing nothing, and I think it is interesting because the trend is still up. But I wouldn't be a buyer. Yeah, if I had to do a trade, I'd be a buyer on Bitcoin, but I wouldn't be a buyer just yet because there just seems to be a lack of momentum clearly over the last couple of months or so. Oh, it's 3 months now. No, it's 2 months now. And I think I said last time, I wonder if everyone is a bit punch drunk by the sell-off we saw in cryptos from those highs, you know, $65,000 in Bitcoin, middle of April, and it's halved. You know, it's more than halved. So I wonder if all the hodlers are a little bit punch drunk by this move, and there's been no real groundbreaking news, has there, as far as I know, for Bitcoin and the rest of the cryptos. So there hasn't been a catalyst, and I do wonder maybe now it goes back to trading more like a normal thing. You know, it doesn't go up threefold in as many months. We perhaps see more normal trading. I don't know, but I think it's an interesting one to watch next week. If we flip it over to the hourly charts, let's have a look at that. Again, if I was a short-term trader, I'd probably be thinking about being a buyer because, again, if we look on the price action, the words for the day. If you look at June, you know, when it got slammed down, didn't it, to 28,000, came back really quickly. 28 to 30 has been such a floor for Bitcoin, you know, and we're trading at the moment 31.8-ish. So you could argue the risk reward favours being a buyer down here, but it's really, you know, it's really struggling to get any momentum. I think if it goes below 28, we could well see the floodgates open in terms of fresh selling. You know, and it gets driven back down, you know, perhaps back down to this little area from December, down around 22.5, something like that. But that trend is still up. It's just boring, you know. And for me, for my own approach to trading, I don't want to trade boring markets because I want to trade markets where it's moving, you know, like oil, for example. And Bitcoin has been a bit trapped the last two months or so. But it'll be interesting to watch next week. But again, I'd be expecting 28,000 to be a floor for the price. Let's see how it works out. What else? Let's have a look at stock market, shall we? Let's have a quick look at Ethereum. I'm guessing Ethereum is going to be pretty much the same. Yeah, it's the same stuff, isn't it? Same price action, doing nothing, although a bit more volatile than Bitcoin. But again, let's see. You know, for me, I'll be watching these old lows around 1670 to see if it can hold. Let's take a look at stock markets. Let's start off with the S&P. Best stock market index in the world, in my opinion. If you really wanted to trade just one market, I'd definitely lean towards something like the S&P. But not surprising. It shouldn't come as a surprise. But in the last week, you know, we've seen fresh all-time highs again for the S&P. You know, the market that continues to defy gravity. I think in the last week, the S&P had doubled from its March low. So we had that massive sell-off in March 2020. I mean, off the back of the pandemic really starting to spread. And it's doubled this week. The level it hit this week is more than double the low. And I don't think anybody saw that. I definitely didn't in March 2020 when the markets were falling off a cliff. But here we are. So we did see a bit of volatility over the last couple of days because of, again, these inflation concerns. You know, for me, it's the same old, same old. The trend is still up. So you're looking at the daily charts. You know, I'd be looking for buying opportunities on the S&P. It is overstretched, you know, but it's a market that continues to go to sort of defy any idea of being overbought and go higher. You know, we did see it. Maybe today is going to be a bit interesting. We did see it break down a bit yesterday. It snapped back fairly sharpish though, about 5 o'clock yesterday. But for me, you know, I'd still be looking, if we had any deeper sell-offs, I'd still be looking to be a buyer. I know it's sort of the same thing every week on the S&P, but it's a market where the trend is really clear. You know, and for me, the only sign that trend was changing, I'd be looking first of all, if it lost that June low, which is it's less than a month ago it set that low. So if it dropped a couple of 100 points from here, you know, perhaps we're going to see a deeper sell-off. But for now, I'd still be looking to buy the dips on that one for now. Let's take a look at the Ftse. So in the UK, the Ftse is often a bit of an odd one, the Ftse, because clearly what's going on with the pound will help it. It's quite weighted towards banking stocks and oil stocks, so it's not particularly representative of the broader stock market. And again, it's a little bit boring, but you know, arguably the bias is still just about up. If we picked up on these lows from January of this year, you know, it's sort of falling out of that trend a little bit, but loads of support for the Ftse from about 6,800 through to 6,920. So that could be interesting next week to see if we see it snap back a bit. You know, I'd have thought if the US stock markets recover from the sell-off over the last couple of days, we'll see the Ftse come back a little bit. Let's see what happens. The DAX, did the DAX hit fresh all-time highs this week? No, maybe not, I don't know. Oh, maybe it did, yeah. And again, it's a bit lacking of volatility. It's almost as if like the European markets have put the brakes on a bit, even though US markets, you know, have hit fresh all-time highs in the last week. It feels like European markets have lost a bit of momentum. But the DAX, you know, I've been watching the 14,750 to 15,250 under quite a bit of pressure today. I wonder clearly if that's maybe affected by those awful floods that they're having in Germany. You know, pretty drastic, all the lives lost. Perhaps you know, we're seeing a bit of pressure. It's doing a different thing to the rest of these indices. But you know, look how quickly it's rallied off these late June lows. You know, 15,270 to 15,300. You know, if we saw the market under some pressure next week, that for me would be an obvious level to watch. So let's see what happens. And the Nikkei is still, I think, still correcting. I think I mentioned it's the oldest trade I've got at the moment is on the Nikkei. So I have obviously my own trading account, and I've had a trade on the Nikkei. I think it's since December. Here somewhere when it was trending higher, and I think I've got a stop loss at break even, but it's just not done much for the last few months. The Japanese index. So we're still arguably in this correction that looks, I don't know, something like that, and I think it needs to break above 29,400 to get a move on. We did look at crude oil. Someone's just asked for crude oil. It was the third thing we looked at, crude oil. You think you can rewind this thing while you're watching it, otherwise the recording will be available later. So Nikkei, it needs to break 29,400. It's still pretty boring and still correcting, I think, the Nikkei. So what should we look at next? Let's look at some currencies. I think it's been a really scrappy week for the currencies, for me anyway. I do have a trade at the moment, long pound against the dollar, and I was really wondering if we're going to see this level hold. These old lows on the pound from March at 136.70, 136 to 137 has been good support. Saying that, it hasn't actually done much over the last 3 or 4 weeks. You can see it's pretty sideways. So for me, it could be interesting going into next week to see if we see these old levels hold. I think if we break below that, we could well see the start of a new trend downwards for the pound. I think for fans of the RSI, we do have quite a bit of divergence going on, where the market has slipped lower, but the RSI has made higher lows. Let's see what happens. But a bit of a scrappy week for that one. Euro US dollar, I think it's pretty much the same. We do have that European interest rate decision next week, so perhaps we'll get a bit of volatility off the back of that. Clearly a big level coming up, 117 on Euro US dollar. So I would still sort of fancy a bounce in the euro. It's not happening really yet though, so it's a bit of a dull market. But lots of support from 116 for November last year. So let's see what happens. Perhaps we will see a bit of strength ahead of this level for euro against the US dollar. I saw somebody popped in a question on dollar yen, so we'll have a look at dollar yen. I do have a trade on dollar yen actually, and I think it's much more interesting at the moment than the euro or the pound. I would be a buyer if I didn't have a trade on. I'd be a buyer at dollar yen. I think it is interesting because we've had probably the trend I would focus on at the moment in dollar yen, even though it's sort of fallen out of it. I'd still give it one last chance. It's from these April lows. So these April lows come in. The trend looks like that. So the market has fallen out of that trend on the 8th of July. But we've fallen out, but we haven't really seen any follow through. So for me, this is always an interesting setup. So actually, I think I'd be a buyer at 110.17. The closest I'd have my stop would be underneath that low from the 8th of July. There's better support back here from the beginning of June at 109-ish. But I think this is really interesting, dollar yen. The dollar has been knocked back and we've seen it come back up again. Let's see what happens next week. That's an interesting market to watch. So for me, so far, the interesting ones to watch next week: oil, dollar yen, and S&P, and the Nasdaq. We didn't look at the Nasdaq, but because these markets have been so strong. So I think there'll be interesting markets to watch next week. And I think that's it, isn't it? That's the normal markets we cover. I don't think I've missed anything. So I'll just I'll jump into the comments and pick out any stuff. Can you have a look at the Russell? So it's the smaller cap, isn't it? The Russell 2000. Let's have a look at that. It's interesting. I did see something on Twitter about this yesterday. It's quite interesting, isn't it, that we looked at the S&P. Let's have a quick look at the Nasdaq and then compare it to the Russell. If we had a look at the Nasdaq 100, which I'm guessing again made fresh all-time highs this week, briefly above 15,000. If we look at the Russell though, Russell, it really has not participated in this ongoing strength in US stock markets since March. So it's 4 months since we saw a new high for the Russell. So I suppose if you were going to try and build a negative argument for stocks, you could say, well, perhaps we are seeing stock markets starting to flag, even though the bigger stuff, the S&P and the Nasdaq, tech focused obviously, still doing well. The Russell 2000 is going sideways. So for me, an aggressive trade, I would be a buyer, because we've seen 2,100 has been a good floor for the Russell. It's oversold on the RSI down here, so I could be tempted to be a buyer and see if it squeezes back up to have a look at these highs. If it starts breaking below 2,100, I think it looks interesting. So I think we'll have to start including that on the regular stuff that we look at during the week. But it's interesting that it hasn't participated in this strength over the last 4 months. So let's come back to it and see how it's going. Right, let me just scroll down. Copper. Where would you put your stop loss, and would you say correction happened this week? I think it's been an interesting market, copper. I do have a trade on copper, an older trade, because the trend is still up. And I think it is a buy, copper, but it's a bit boring. So for me, I mean, it's great moves in Feb and then April into May. If I went back, and I think this is a 10-year plus high on copper that we saw up here. But if we went back and picked up on a trend, so for me, our trend looks, something like that. So for me, that is a textbook trend in copper. Pushes out away from the trend line, sells off, comes back near the trend line, everything is fine. So for me, the trend is still up. So if I was a buyer now at 433, the closest I'd put my stop would be the other side of that June low, and then maybe even back here at 380. So I think that's interesting, copper. It's the trend is up. It hasn't done much for the last couple of weeks, but as I often say, I think a great skill that many of us don't have when it comes to trading is to be patient. Just because you've decided to buy or sell doesn't necessarily mean the market is going to respond like that. Sometimes you need to wait. But I think that's interesting. That trend is definitely still up in copper. So let's see. Roblox is it the kids? Is it some toy company? Isn't it that was floated earlier this year? I don't think we have that much data on Roblox, whatever they're called. So I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? When you've only got 3 or 4 months worth of data, what would you do? If I had to do anything, I'd be a buyer. I'd give it, even though it's broken below this low from wherever it is, June, $78.47. I'd be a buyer. I'd be an aggressive buyer here. Be a buyer and maybe put a stop. An aggressive one would be at 74 to see if it, and the risk reward is good in that. If I'm a buyer at 77, looking for 94, I've got $17 upside and maybe only $3 downside. A looser stop would be down here somewhere. It does look a bit boring, I have to say. We haven't got that much data to go on though, have we? But for me, I think that would be one. But it wouldn't surprise me if, famous last words, in a week's time we look at this and it's still around 77, 78. Copper, we did copper. Natural gas and wheat, yeah. Natural gas has been good. I haven't got any trades on natural gas at the moment. I think we do have a trade in this account. Yeah, natural gas. We do a trade in this account from 4th of June, the last video we did on natural gas. And it's been brilliant. It's up 760 quid. So it's made 3 times the risk. I don't have any trades for myself on natural gas. But it's been a good market the last few months or so. It's interesting because it can go really wild, natural gas, and I'd have to say at the moment the trend is up in natural gas. So if I was going to do anything, it'd have to be a buyer. The question, as usual, would be, well, where would your stop go? So for me, if I picked up on this trend off the April lows, so if I was a buyer now at 364, the absolute closest I have my stop will be the other side of 3.5. And on the hourly chart, I think we'll see it perhaps a bit clearer if we flip this over to an hourly chart. But it just seems to be pausing a bit, natural gas, and it can go boring for quite some time, and then suddenly goes up or down like a rocket. So for me, I'd probably, because that trend is up, I'd be a buyer and put my stop somewhere the other side of here. But yeah. I think it's a bit of a tricky one here. It was much easier back here when we were trending along quite nicely, and it's just gone a little bit sideways now for a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. So let's see. But for me, the bias still be up on natural gas. Wheat. I do have a trade on wheat, and it's not doing very well from memory at the moment. But let's have a quick look at wheat, because the commodities did really well earlier this year, and I think it sort of came back to the trend line. Let's have a look. Let's take that out. We've got a bit. You can see it's a little bit thinly traded. We've got a little bit of sort of patchy candles on here. Let's take a quick look. So it looks let's say our trend. Oh, there you go, perfect. Look at that. Again, perfect touch of the trend line. So if you were following that trend, which goes back to late 2019, the autumn of 2019, you'd be a buyer. You know, we've come back to the trend line. We've seen a big move, big sell-off from 216 down to 176. So what's that? 20% move in wheat. I think it's interesting down here. You know, the more patient may want to see if we get a bit of weakness next week and a little double touch and off we go again. But for me, if I had to do anything with that, I'd be a buyer. I think I've actually in from up here somewhere, so I've got much worse entry on that. But for me, and you know, the closest you could put your stop, the closest I put my stop, the other side of that trend line, or perhaps the other side of 168. Quite important 168, the old highs and the low here. But it's interesting that now it's come back to that trend. Let's see what happens and see if the trend resumes. Argo blockchain. I think we did we look at that? Have we got that one? Hang on a second. Argo blockchain. What do they? I can never remember what they do. Oh, I remember this dodgy price. I think it's difficult this because we don't have. It looks. I mean, that looks. To me, I'd say that looks pretty weak, doesn't it? It was only yesterday, or actually today, it made a new low for this down move. We don't have much data for this down move, so for me, the trend looks a little bit down still, doesn't it? So yeah, it still looks a bit weak. I mean, it did look like it was trying to build a base above 1, but yeah, for me, it's probably not one I'd be too interested in, to be honest. But yeah, a bit weak still. Let's see what happens. Let's see if it comes back. But we don't have much history, and we've got that dodgy price in there for some reason, unfortunately. Blah blah blah. We looked at oil. Can you explain the general idea why the Bitcoin overnight fee is positive for sell positions? I must admit, I'm not that familiar with that, but it's because of the interest rate differential. You know, if you go short on certain currencies, you get a credit to your account overnight because of the differential. Here you go, short position overnight fee. So if you're long, you pay 0.05% overnight. If you're short, you get a credit. And I think it's the interest rate on whatever it is on the cost of borrowing, but I am by no means an expert on that sort of stuff. Please touch on hedging. Well, hedging is a big topic. I don't know what you mean by hedging. I mean, the simplest way of explaining hedging. Let's say you had a basket of stocks. Let's say you had 500 grand invested in US stocks, and you were a bit worried about the stock market in the short term, but you didn't want to sell your stocks. So you had, you know, I don't know, Apple, Netflix, Tesla, Microsoft, blah, blah, blah. One way to hedge that risk would be to sell the S&P. You might sell 500 grand's worth of the S&P. So that way you're short the index, you're long your stocks, you're short on the S&P is a hedge. So that's hedging, you know, in its most simplest format. I can't really say more than that, to be honest. It's not something I do because I'm just more directional trading. But that's what hedging is. But if there's anything you want me to add to that, drop me an email. Right, we looked at dollar yen, gold. We looked at gold. Royal Mail. Royal Mail's been a great one, hasn't it, recently? I think like a lot of people in the UK, I've got shares in Royal Mail because of the float whenever they came to the market. I just wondered if they were getting a bit tired up here, actually, because they've had a heck of a run, haven't they? Because they came... Where did they... I don't know. I can't even remember where they debuted. But anyway, doesn't matter. But this great run from September 2020, £1.70 a share to £6 a share in June of this year. So for me... if I traded them, I'd probably be thinking about taking my profits now. But because I sort of own them and don't own that many, you just sort of forget about them, which isn't really the right thing to do, is it? But for me, great trend in Royal Mail. If they broke below these lows from April, 475, I'd be a bit worried about a deeper sell-off. But let's see what happens if they get down to a fiver. That's still 10% below where we are now. That's still a bit of a move, isn't it? But I mean, they've had a fantastic run, Royal Mail, which is a bit incredible. But for me, that trend is still up. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens around that trend line. Can we look at soybeans? Yeah, let's look at I did a trade on soybeans this week actually. I don't know if we cover soybeans. Let's have a quick look. No, we don't. Let me bring it up on something else. Hang on a second. Let me just show you. I thought it's interesting that the price action in soybeans is pretty interesting. I thought it was anyway. Let's have a look. Soybeans, then I'll drag the screen across. So I bought it the other day. Really, because I mean it had a great trend. If we take this out, I don't know how much data I've got here. Been a great market on the way up from August last year. Great trend. And then I did a trade in January. It went nowhere for ages. Then it really got a move on again in April. And it got absolutely clobbered off the mid-May highs. The mid-May highs around 1670. But what I thought was interesting, even though the trend had broke, I just wondered if it overshot on the downside. So I did the trade in about here because we'd had, the market comes down, rallies, holds again. So I thought, well, it's an interesting trade down here with a stop either the other side of there or somewhere a bit further out. So I wonder if we're going to see, has it built a base? Has it perhaps overreacted on the downside? For me, if it broke below 1240, the argument for being a buyer has gone out the window. But I think it's an interesting market given the price action, that phrase again, over the last month, the old soybeans. So let's see, let's come back to it and see if it does recover from here. Crude oil, we did crude oil, Aussie dollar, New Zealand dollar. Yeah, let's have a look at that. We don't normally look at those, do we? Aussie dollar, New Zealand dollar. Let's take a look. It's tricky. I mean, it's clearly you could argue it's like broadly sideways over time. We've got a few duff prices in there that are just messing the chart up. But broadly sideways over time, but clearly swings around from a midpoint. I suppose at the moment, I wouldn't be a buyer today, but it's not a market I watch. But I suppose it's an interesting one to watch next week because we do, it is broadly sideways, but we get these swings away and then it just trades back into the range again. So I suppose an aggressive trade would be to wait to see if we get, at least one day of strength, be a buyer with a really tight stop. We've got good support coming up from the 3rd of Feb at 105.40. So it'd be interesting to see what happens if it does push down to there. It's 105.80 at the moment. But I would think, well, we're going to see it snap back. It's not really that directional. Do we get a bit of a snap back move? It's very oversold on the RSI. Let's see what happens. Oh yeah, dollar basket. Let's have a look at the dollar basket. We haven't looked at that one for a while. So DXY, this is a great market to watch because it's the US dollar, as it says down here, against a mix of the euro, Japanese yen, pound, Canadian dollar, Swedish krona, blah, 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 blah. So it's the dollar index. And I did say, I think, earlier this year, was it building a base? And there was a great opportunity in it. I think, did we do a trade on it? Hold on a second. Let me have a look. I'm sure we did a trade in a live stream on the dollar index. Oh, there we go. 28th of May. We did a trade. Bought it at 90.22. It's up a couple of £100. So that's proved to be pretty good. So we bought it in here. I do still want to be a buyer on weakness. I might not be a buyer up here, but because we had this massive sell-off last year from the March highs in 2020 when the US dollar did really well because the coronavirus pandemic was starting to spread. Everyone panicked. The dollar was seen as a safe haven. Then, of course, as we went on from March, April last year, everyone embraced risk again. So the dollar got sold. But we've seen it build this base this year, and it continues to do it. It continues to hold above about 89, and that's why I did the trade on the live stream on the 28th of May, because we come back to here and we've pushed back up again. So I think what will be interesting is if we get a dollar breakout in the next couple of weeks through 93.50-ish. So I think let's keep coming back to it. I think it could be interesting if we see the dollar breakout. It's because you could argue it's building a massive double bottom at the moment, and if you believe in double bottoms, I'm not sure I do, but if you do, 93.50 to 89 what's that, 450 points. The target would be 98 up to here if we get it breaking out. But I think it'd be interesting to see what happens up here. I should probably think about taking some profits on that trade we did, because it's pushing back towards what has been a problem. But an interesting market to watch next week. Can we have a look at Palladium? Yeah, let's have a look at Palladium. Oh, it's got really hit today, isn't it? I mean, for me, that trend is still up in Palladium. You know, it's a really interesting market. It was a great market in 2019 into early 2020. A fantastic market to trade, and a lot of my profits in 2019 came from Palladium because it was just a brilliant trend. Then you can see get absolutely whacked in last year, but I would argue the trend is still up in Palladium. You know, if we looked at it from off these lows here, it's pretty volatile. But if we take it off the lows in May of last year, so we're 14 months into this, we saw it get clobbered back to the trend line in June, and it's doing the same thing again. I'd still be a buyer personally. I think I do have a trade on the Palladium anyway, but I'd be a buyer. You know, I'd be looking to see where the strength comes back in. I wouldn't be a buyer today because it's got hit so hard. But I think it's an interesting market to watch next week because we have, 2400 has been good support for Palladium. Let's see what happens next week. Virgin Galactic. Do you know what? I should have gone short Virgin Galactic because what happened this week, I was talking to somebody about it over the weekend. It's exactly what I expected to happen. The price was never going to go up this week. That's what I thought anyway, because of course he did that successful flight over the weekend. So what was going to happen, and everyone knew the flight was coming, so the flight wasn't a surprise. There was going to be no catalyst to drive the price higher, so I should have gone short. I should have gone short last Friday actually. When was last Friday? That was then $42 it closed. And I just wonder, clearly Virgin Galactic, loads of volatility. What's going to be the next major thing that drives the stock price higher? So I wonder if it will just drift a bit from here until we have the first passenger flights or something like that. So for me, again, it's interesting how the technicals are played out. Runs up on the successful tests it had ahead of last weekend. Runs up though, peaks at above 60 on the 28th of June, which was also where it ran up to last time round in Feb of this year. So I wonder if we just see it gradually drift back down to earth, perhaps not as low as $15. I wouldn't have thought that. But I suppose if you want to be a buyer, for me, I'd be a little bit patient. But I think that was really an obvious trade, really, and I should have done that because it wasn't going to. I thought it was unlikely it was going to go higher. But let's see what happens. Let's see if we see a bit of stability come back in, perhaps after these sellers have moved away. Cocoa and wheat. We looked at wheat, didn't we? Let's have a look at cocoa. I should do a quick reminder of the contact details. So don't forget to find out more about Capital.com. Go to Capital.com. To find out more about me, go to davidjonestrading.com and to find out more about the training course that I've launched on trading, obviously. To any questions after this, drop me an email, david.jones@capital.com. Follow me on Twitter @JonesTheMarkets and follow Capital.com on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. Okay, let's jump back into it. Cocoa, we're going to look at, weren't we? Cocoa US. I was looking at this week actually, because I do, again, it's one of those, it's in this long-term uptrend, cocoa. If we went back off the lows, I don't know, where would we take the trend from? But basically, I would expect it to rally from here, but it's just not really getting a move on. It's right, look at that, it's bang on that trend line. So for me, I'd be a buyer. I'd have to be a buyer, or maybe be a bit more patient and wait to see if this move doesn't go crashing through the trend line next week. But for me, the longer term trend is up. The price action, that phrase again, over the last 18 months has been to take the view that cocoa is cheap down at 21.30 to 22. So we have seen the market reverse off these levels in the past. So I think it's an interesting one to watch and I'd be expecting strength to come in. But we're not really getting it yet. You know, it's declined a lot. It's off by nearly, well, not quite a third. It's off 25% off the November highs. So let's see what happens down here. Do we see the buyers come back in? What else? Oh, hang on. I just jumped in my questions there. US 30, someone said. The Dow. We don't look at the Dow, do we? I'm guessing. I think the Dow is another one that hasn't followed the market. The S&P higher, has it? Let's have a look at it. Let's have a quick look. Oh, it's not far off though. Oh, actually, it is. No, it is. It did push out higher. Talking rubbish. Actually, it looks like today even it pushed out higher. So the high. Hang on. What was the high back here? The Dow high 35,101, 35,06. Oh, it hasn't quite. It came within 5 points of its May high. That might be an out of hours high. What can you say? For me, it still have to be bullish, you know, because the trend is still up, isn't it? Let's have a look at the short-term chart and see what. Looks like the stock market's getting hit a bit. Oh yeah, in the current hour. So it's come off about, what is that? I can't even do the maths in my head. 200 points in the last hour. But for me, you know, we see these stock markets get slammed, and we just see the buyers come back in. So if I was trading it this afternoon, I'd wait to see how it performed if we pushed net, you know, back towards yesterday's low at 34,850. But for me, there's not enough at the moment to convince me that we have seen a top in stock markets. So I'd have to be a buyer on dips, and buyers on dips have been well rewarded this year. Let's see. Why are gold miners lagging gold? Don't know the answer to that one, unfortunately. Sorry. Can we have a look at Coca-Cola? Coca-Cola. Coke. There we go. Let's have a flip it over to the daily chart. Look at that! Wow. Oh, hang on. I think the chart went a bit crazy. The trend is still up, isn't it? So now, as we speak, it's hitting its best levels since March 2020. You know, great trend again, isn't it? Like when we look at a lot of these stocks, you know, they obviously the stock market is going up. What's driving it is stocks going up. So it's not surprising that we see, you know, lots of stocks with decent trends. So for me, I'd be a buyer. The only question is, would you be a buyer here, or would you wait to see if we get a sell-off back to maybe 54 again? But that trend is still up. It's interesting that we are running into, you know, the old highs mid-Feb of last year, $60. I mean, clearly the coronavirus, you know, caused a lot of you know, major sell-off, as you can see here. But you know, for me, that trend is still up in those. So let's see. Air France, Delta Air, American Airlines. Pick one. I'll pick one. American Airlines. Let's have a look. American Airlines. Let's have a look at those. It's interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you could argue it's a trading buy. That's what I would argue. I would say it's maybe a trading buy, because it looks, you know, it looks like, it feels like it's lost a lot of momentum, or a bit of momentum recently. You know, if I was looking at the trend, I'd look at something like that. I don't think it's that relevant at the moment. It's, you know, it's been pretty sideways since March, but what's played out over the last week, you know, we have seen $19 to $20 as being support. So at $20.45, if I had to do anything, I'd be a buyer, and I put a stop the other side of $19 personally. Clearly, I don't have a crystal ball, but that's what I would do. So it's you know, the trend is still broadly up, isn't it, from May of last year? It just hasn't had much momentum in the last few months or so. First Majestic Silver. I'm going to guess that's been a little bit quiet because the price of silver is dead. Oh, that's getting a bit slammer-armored, isn't it? I think we looked at this, didn't we? And I thought it was the trend. It looks like it's falling out of the trend now, doesn't it? Let's have a quick look. Yeah, I think we look at it a week ago, and it was just there, just sitting on that trend line. It's interesting that it's lost the trend line this week. I mean, for me, clearly it's being dictated by what's going on with silver, and we know that silver is going nowhere. For me, if I'd have bought it there, which I would have done, I would probably be stopped out by now, I'd have thought. It'd be interesting to see what happens if it pushes back towards $12, because that was good support. So for me, I would be sit on my hands and wait and see at the moment with First Majestic. Look at that pop up there when silver touched $30 briefly earlier this year. So for me, it still looks a little bit weak, doesn't it? Novo Nordisk. Never heard of those, but let's have a look and see if we cover them. Novo. No, don't cover those, sorry. Nasdaq 100. Yeah, we didn't look at that. Let's have a look at the Nasdaq. Is it still bullish? I'm going to guess it is pretty bullish, to be honest. It's a market that hit all-time highs only 2 days ago. So to me, that is still a pretty bullish market. So, I mean, look at this trend. This absolute... I did trade this. I'm still in the trade on this, actually, on this trend. So this has done well. I don't think we've got a trade in this account on it. But, I mean, look at that. If we flip it over to an hourly chart... And I think the way to look at this is, or the way, because I know people have a problem trading with trends. Yeah, I think there's a guy or there's somebody who's been posting on our Nasdaq videos saying they've been short for a while, you know, and I think people see a market that goes up and think, oh, this can't go up forever, and they go short and they get absolutely clobbered. But for me, look at the Nasdaq now, right? It's at 14,780. Which direction is the next 500-point move more likely to be? Me, I would say up. Yeah, because that doing that bet has played out really well over the last few weeks, over the last few months, over the last 15 months. So for me, you know, I wouldn't be calling a top. And clearly, at some point, the market is going to top, and we're going to see a sell-off. But maybe that top has happened, but maybe that top doesn't happen for another 3 years. Who knows? So for me, you know, I'd be trading with the trend. I think it's interesting what's going on today. I mean, it got slammed yesterday. It'd be interesting to watch for the rest of today. But, you know, loads of support further out, down at 14,500 for the Nasdaq. So for me, you know, I'd still be being a buyer personally on the Nasdaq. And at some point, I'll be wrong, you know. But you know, going with the trend has done all right, I think, for trend followers over the last 12 months or so when it comes to markets like these. So for me at the moment, there's nothing to say that's changed, but clearly one day. Do you ever short sell or only go long? I would short sell if a market was trending lower, definitely. But at the moment, of course, so, you know, over the last year, it's a good question. So many things have been going up, you know, oil, stock markets, obviously, commodities. You know, so many things have been going up. If things changed, I would definitely be looking to sell short. But yeah, just everything's just gone crazy, isn't it? Do you know what's happening with the IBEX Spanish index? That condition is crazy. Okay, let's have a look at it. Let's have a look. Spain. I don't know what we looked at the IBEX before. Oh, there we go. Oh yeah. I wonder why that is really getting hit, isn't it? The old IBEX. I mean, these European indices, they have moved quite differently in recent months to the American indices. I don't know why. You know, I mean, clearly, I don't know why. I don't really worry why either, to be honest, because I don't trade a lot of the European indices. I mean, that has been really hit, hasn't it? That's gone from 9.3 middle of June to 8.4 now. It's lost 10%. Big sell-off. Perhaps this is the sign that stock markets are going to make a top soon, that the American market is the last one hanging on to its trend and all these other markets are giving up the ghost. It'd be interesting. I think it's an interesting market to watch next week because we're running into 8.2 to sort of 8.4 next week. So that's an interesting market to watch, the old IBEX. But yeah, that is pretty weak, isn't it, at the moment? I would be watching to see if we see it snap back next week, but it's not a market I watched at all. So let's come back to it next time around. Do you think it's much better to focus on support and resistance, how these two marry each other, succession of higher highs and higher lows, as opposed to finding that one holy grail indicator? What an excellent question. It's like I wrote that question myself. I didn't. Yes, there is no holy grail indicator. This is what my trading course is all about. There is no magic system, right? There is no magic system for trading. But I think we all waste a lot of time in the beginning. Let's not forget, 75% of people lose. Why do they lose? Because they're all probably making the same mistake, thinking there's a magic system when it comes to trading. And there really isn't. You know, if you're right half the time, but when you're right, you make £200, and when you're wrong, you lose £100, it's a license to print money. But people focus on trying to be right all the time, looking for a holy grail indicator. Utter waste of time. But what I say will not affect most people. They'll carry on looking for a holy grail indicator, and most people will carry on losing. That's a fact of trading life, I think. But much better to devote your energies somewhere else, in my opinion. Netflix. I've looked at Netflix for a while. Let's have a look at Netflix. I think we're gonna have to start wrapping things up soon, but we'll have a quick look at Netflix. It's interesting. It's not doing much, is it? Not since July last year. Did this move out? Look at this move out to a bit like the Amazon move. This is the stock price. If I look at Amazon next, actually, false breakout in Jan and just sideways, isn't it? Netflix. So, is what I would say to that one. Far more interesting ones than that one at the moment. All a bit sideways. But Amazon and Apple actually made all-time highs, fresh all-time highs this week. And again, it's interesting to see. Does this end up being a false break by Amazon? I'd definitely be looking to buy the dip on Amazon if I was watching Amazon at the moment. So it's getting hit a bit today. Let's see what happens. But broke out to fresh all-time highs earlier this month. Let's see what happens there. And Apple as well. Apple again hit all-time highs, and they're giving it. They're sort of hanging around. They gave it up a bit yesterday. Is it the last gasp of the bull market? These big names hitting all-time highs before the market crashes. Who knows? Apple. Yeah, you did say that last week. Apple. We did crude oil. That's the third thing we look at. Why do you get so much more leverage on FX markets? Yeah, good question. Because they are less volatile in percentage terms. So I can't remember what the numbers are. Let's say I want to say 30 times leverage on FX. Something like Apple can move 5%, 10%. Something like the pound or the euro doesn't move 5-10% in a day, or very rarely does it. So you get more leverage because the market is seen as less volatile than other markets, for example. So that's the reason you get more leverage with FX. What amount did you open this account with? So this account with Capital, this is the account we use for all the videos, and so whenever we do a video, I always try and do a trade. It started 2 years ago with 10 grand, so it's up 5 grand, 50% in 2 years, which I think is a good performance. It's still, because it has made a profit over the last couple of years. It's a bit of an odd one because I only trade the markets we do YouTube videos on. So whenever I do a video, like the gold video yesterday, I always try and set a trade up because I think the people who subscribe to our channel want to see trades. I think it's all part of watching videos about trading. So I always put a trade up. So that's slightly artificial. And because of what people watch on our channel, we do a lot of videos on gold, silver, and oil. So again, those will be the markets I'll be trading. So we don't, when we do a video on something like Palladium, nobody watches it. Which, and these are some of the markets that you have good trends in. So it is quite an artificial account, but it's real money and it's made money over the last couple of years. But it does tend to be focused on the same sort of markets time and again. But I do in these live streams try and do the odd trade now and again. So the odd strange trade in there, like Peloton short, that was from a live stream, wasn't it? Ethereum was from a video. Copper was probably from a video. Facebook, I think that was from a live stream. Yeah, I think it was actually. Facebook trades. Dollar index was a live stream. DAX was probably a pre-recorded video. So, but a lot of the same stuff tends to get traded by this account. And because it's not my money, it is real money. It's Capital's money. It's not my money. I definitely give up more profit than I would do in my own account. But even so, 50% in 2 years, not to be sniffed at, I don't think. Right. When you add a stop loss but don't add a take profit, how do you work out risk reward? Do you only take profit at a certain risk reward? Good point. Yes, I do. So for me, I think another thing another mistake that people make, as well as looking for the holy grail, is they take their profits too quickly. So for me, I will set, if I set a stop loss, I want to see a decent move in my favour, which I talk about more in my training course. But I'm not in a hurry to move the stop loss, and I won't set target prices because I think, well, I don't know how far the market's going to go. For example, one of the a really good trending market for me, and we covered it on a live stream. I said I started trading this market earlier this year because someone mentioned it on a live stream. Was sterling yen. So I did quite a few trades in sterling yen in the first few months of this year. And it just really took off, And I think for me, if I had target prices, I'd miss out on the bigger moves. And it is quite often, like a lot of things in life, the whole 80-20 rule, that 80% of your business might come from 20% of your clients. And I think I definitely see that play out for me in trading, that perhaps 80% of my profits comes from less than 20% of my trades, So the ones that really do take off, I don't want to limit it by having a target price. And for me, it's just something that works and that has worked over the years. How's the euro yen trade going from the other week? I don't know. Let's have a look. Absolutely no idea because it's not my money. But let's have a look and see. Hang on. Is it still going or did we get stopped out? Euro yen. Oh, it's against us. So we bought it at 130.83 with a stop at 129. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at that. That was a great trend, wasn't it? And perhaps it's changing. Oh, I don't think so, not yet. I'm still happy with that. I'm still fairly relaxed with that one. Where was the stop? 129. Yeah, down there. I'm pretty relaxed about that trade on euro yen. The market is just taking a little bit of time to come around to my way of thinking. That's all it is. So I'm fairly relaxed on that. If it breaks below these lows, I'll be a bit less relaxed. But let's see what happens. What do you think of currency strength meters? I've got absolutely no idea what that is. Is it like one of those things that you hold up to the wall when you're going to drill into the wall to see if there's wires behind it? I've got absolutely no idea what a currency strength meter is. I doubt, in my cynical, grumpy old man way, I doubt they're that good. But if someone's making money trading with them, more power to their elbow. Right, we're going to wrap things up there. Thanks for coming along. We'll do it. Actually, no, we're not doing it next Friday, because I'm not going to be here next Friday. So unfortunately, we won't be doing a live stream next Friday. Be back in business the week after. Don't forget, of course, we'll still do the updates during the week. So we'll still look at the various markets we look at during the week. If you're subscribed to the channel, you're watching it now. If you click on subscribe, you can be subscribed and get notifications. We do have that stocks channel you can watch. There'll be updates on that as well. But the next live one will be in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks for coming along. Always enjoy doing these. Always have some interesting markets to look at. Absolutely gorgeous day today. Hope it's nice wherever you are. You're in Barbados. I bet it's nice where you are. But have a good weekend, and we'll do it all again in 2 weeks' time. Okay. Good luck with your trading. There's all the contact details. Any questions, drop me an email, david.jones@capital.com. Go to Capital.com to find out more. Open an account, open a demo account, and davidjonestrading.com for stuff from me. Okay, have a good weekend.